All right, I'd invite you to take your Bibles with me one more time. I feel like I should have more originality. I watch some of my videos just to critique myself, and I start every message the exact same way. So take God's word and turn with me, just for sake of argument, Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2, and just a few more thoughts to give to us tonight. I hope it's been a blessing. Just maybe that's what we normally say, but I hope it's also been challenging for us. I would hate for us to have all sat here. I just think it's impossible for us all to have sat here all day and just check every box and say done, 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 good. I think that would be highly unlikely, or you're very dishonest with yourself. I think those are the two realities here. And so hopefully it's given us some things to think about. And to be perfectly honest, it doesn't get a whole lot easier in this message, just with what he kind of challenges us with, but I feel like it's helpful for us to think about some things that maybe are even hard for us. So we have looked at thus far, let's back up to where we got. I'm getting too old to remember everything. We talked about at the first one, the foundation of community, right? Doctrine. It all starts there. Otherwise, we're just basically a social club having a good time, which I am having a good time, but it's more than that. I was even thinking as we were finishing up the last song, this is like the worst part of a Sunday when Dad's gone, because it's like I'm almost done, right? Like no more messages to preach and everything, just with all the effort and enjoy. But we ought to be having fun, but it ought to be more important than that. It ought to be important to us, and it ought to be more than just having fun. We talked about the foundation of community in the end of verse 42, really the middle of verse 42, the life of community with our fellowship. And then just a few minutes ago, we talked about the practices of community. And tonight, we're going to wrap up with the proof of community and just give us a few things to think about. I would like to again begin by reading our entire passage, really covering more territory in this sermon than we have any of the other ones, but I think it'll make sense when we get into it. So Acts chapter 2 and verse number 42, And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of bread and in prayers. And fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done by the apostles. And all that believed were together and had all things common, and sold their possessions and goods, and parted them to all men, as every man had need. And they, continuing daily with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to the church daily such as should be saved. It is my goal today, we spent a lot of time really in just a few verses. We've looked at a lot of cross references, but focus on this. And maybe a goal in a lot of my messages is every time you read Acts chapter 2 for the rest of your life, you at least, even if you can't put together all the amazing alliteration phrases that I had to title it, but that some of these things will come to your mind. And I'm not just reading a record. If anything, I'm really reading a pattern that I should be trying to emulate here. And so we want to think about in verses 44 through 47, the proof of community, as we kind of identify some marks of great commitment to a church. Commitment is easy to claim when nothing has been required of us, right? Be very committed when nothing is being asked of us, being very committed when nothing is being pulled from us. The proof of commitment comes when it begins to cost us something, when circumstances test whether or not we will continue, and when our manner of life becomes visible to people outside the church. Acts chapter 2, here at the end of it, doesn't just merely tell us that these believers were a community. It doesn't say that they were a church. It starts to break down some details and describing a church, describing the way a community should act. And so instead of saying, you could just wrap it up. Verse 41, the day that gladly received his word were baptized, and the same day were added unto them about 3,000 souls, and it was a great church, right? You could say that, and I would argue that if you were to recap it, one could make that argument, but it doesn't just say they were a church. It says, let me tell you what the church looked like. Let me tell you how they were living together and worshiping together and what their focus was together. And this is helpful. Otherwise, you could just read it and say, yeah, we need to be a good church, but it tells us what this actually looks like in our life. It gives us evidence. And here tonight, as we think about the proof of community, the concern for one another affected the way they regarded their possessions. Their commitment didn't disappear when the excitement of what had gone on just a day or so before had begun to settle down. It talks about how they continued daily. There was constancy. They remained in one accord. They were worshiping with gladness and maintaining a testimony. This was not something that was a one-time event. They had a good church service and everybody kind of went their separate ways. There was a repetitive nature to all of this. And I would even argue, and we've read it, I don't know, 3 or 4, at least 4 times today, maybe at least alluded to it more than that, 44 and 45 especially, the passage maybe becomes even a little bit uncomfortable. It's easy to admire the early church, from a safe distance. It's easy to speak warmly about fellowship, generosity, unity, and our witness. But Acts 2, here at the end of Acts 2, it really forces us to ask whether these truths have produced anything observable in us. Has our commitment to the community, our commitment to the church changed how tightly we hold our possessions, if to just get really right down to brass tacks? Does our commitment continue when it becomes inconvenient? And really asking the question, is there anything outside, or is there anything inside that those outside could see? And we'll be getting to that, especially in verse number 42, just talk about how it was obvious what was going on and having favor with all the people. I don't think it's necessarily referring specifically only to the church. I think there were things going on, and the community to a greater scale was aware of it. Let me kind of clear up, make sure we're all on the same page before we kind of dig into some of this. This passage, especially verse 44 and 45, is not teaching forced communal ownership, right? It's not demanding that every believer sell everything that they possess. What I think it's sowing, what it is sowing is peoples whose lives have been genuinely changed by Christ, and because they belong to the Lord, because they were together, they held their possessions with an open hand, continued with faithfulness, and lived with a public testimony. And I say this here because, I've heard communists, just to be perfectly honest, come to this verse and say, look at what the Bible says. But this verse is not setting out a form of government, right? This verse is not saying this is the way civil government should be set up. This is saying this is the way Christians should act towards one another. There's a pretty wide difference between those two. So the proof of their community was seen in 3 things: their sacrifice, their constancy or continuance, and their witness. So let's think about this, their sacrifice. I was even thinking this afternoon as I was having to do massive reorganization, to be perfectly honest, to make sure we covered all of this, and got down to this section. Again, I was just reading it and kind of reformatting some thoughts here. And I'm like, this is an interesting thing to throw in here, right? When I begin with the passage and it says, and they continue steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, I'm like, amen, yes sir, I love it. Fellowship, amen, a little bit harder, but I love that too. And it goes on, and fellowship, breaking of bread, prayers, fear come about. It's like, I get this, I understand this, I can work with this, but then it starts in verse 44 and 45, and I'm like, wait a minute. Hold up, this is hitting a different way than the rest of it is, and that's probably indicative of what part of the problem is in our life. So I think number one, just to kind of recap the actual verses here, I think they developed a common concern. And I think that and we're going to look at some cross-references and kind of bear down on this, but I just want to kind of lay out, especially in this first point, what we're looking at. They had a common concern that was there. And churches ought to have common concerns. What's important to me ought to be important to you. What's important to you ought to be important to me. Listen, I even consider, I was... you say, well, y'all, you're just being hard on us, man. I had a horrible week, right? Right? And because I realized that I'm not always successful at all of this. It's very easy to become compartmentalized in our own life. I got a lot going on. I got problems. I got difficulties. I have challenges, and nobody cares but me, right? And it's very easy. And the reality is church is a place where we ought to be sharing one another's burdens. And I say that from a mental standpoint, it ought to be a goal of us, and probably none of us are like we ought to be, but even, let's not get too far away from the text. They weren't talking about patting each other on the back and saying, call me if you need somebody to talk to. They were selling possessions and giving stuff away, right? There's a very practical aspect to this, and I don't want to flatten this idea of we just need to be loving each other. Yes, we do, but how does that look in real life? How does it look when there's actual need? How does it look when there's actually problems going on in people's lives? Are we doing what we can? Are we supporting each other? So they did develop a common concern. They carried common burdens. This wasn't like, well, you're having a bad day, stay away from me type deal, right? It wasn't as simple as that. They responded to visible needs. Listen, sometimes people have needs and nobody knows about it. And I mean, that kind of is what it is. But we're talking about if you know somebody has a need, what can I do to meet this need? Listen, we can't all meet everybody's needs all the time. But really the question is not, it's like don't tell me nothing. I don't want to see nothing. It ought to be like, what can I do? What can I help? And not, and I feel like I've mentioned this in other messages, but I think about it often. It's this whole idea of, somebody's having one of those weeks, right? And and you're like, well, let me know if I can do anything for you. Like, it's that kind of concept of, something bad happens and everybody posts on Twitter, thoughts and prayers go out to the victims, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with saying it. I can even appreciate the sentiment, but just telling someone, let me know call me if you need something. Like, okay, right? Seriously, think about how many times you've actually taken somebody up on that. Probably it's pretty rare, right? I'm not getting phone calls around the clock. Remember 6 months ago, you said, call me if you need something. Here I am, right? That's not typically going on. And I think that there's almost an unspoken reality of, I'll tell you, call me if you need something, and you don't call me. And then you can tell me, call me if you need something, and I won't call you. And we've all done thoughts and prayers to each other, right? And as a church family, it ought to be realer than that. And what I mean is, don't say, call me if you need something. Look for what needs exist and try to meet them yourself. So it was a visible need. So let's think about a few things here. We're going to look at some verses again tonight. Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse number 25. You could probably just kind of spend most of the evening in this chapter, at least on this point. I'm not going to do that, but you could. Look at 1 Corinthians 12, 25, maybe verse 26 too. It says, that there be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another. Listen, this ought to challenge our hearts when we read verses like this, because you know what? I care about me a lot, right? If we're just being honest, we care about ourselves a lot. Don't look at me like, what an unspiritual revelation. That's our default state, right? It's a work to do. Paul says it, the reference fails me, but for no man ever yet hated his own soul or his own flesh, right? Our default state is we love ourselves, and we ought to always be working on it, but that's where we are. So when it says that the members should have the same care one for another, what we ought to do is think, how much would I want someone to care for me here? How would I want someone to respond to me? And that's the way I should respond to them. That's the way that I should reach out to them. But that the members should have the same care one for another. And whether one member suffer, all the members suffer with it, or one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. The illustration of using the body cannot be overlooked here, because you never had I know you have, right? It's like when you have a pain, it's almost overriding, it affects everything. I know people here struggle with migraines. I don't know that I've had them. I've had bad headaches. I'm not quite sure where the line is at. I've had very bad headaches, right? But you know what? You have a bad headache or just a bad headache, a migraine, however you want to term it, and it's incapacitating on some level, right? Even if you're maybe able to function, you're not functioning like you want to, right? Or let you hurt, pull a muscle, or my shoulder still hurts. Like, I was on ChatGPT and it said, can you reach across your body? I'm like, no, it hurts really bad when I do that, right? And you know what? So I move just even preaching, I can feel it, right? And it's adjusting everything in my body. I put some cologne on in between services. I have some in the office, and I reached up to the shelf and I'm like, oh, the girls probably heard me like, oh, and I put it up with the other hand, right? Like I'm not doing, right? When there's something affecting the body, it affects the whole body. So to the extent, I mean, the metaphor of the church being the body is over and over and over and over again in the Bible. And so how can we be content with, well, that's their problem and that's their issue and that's their concern and that's their sadness and that's their sorrow and that's their weakness. That's contrary to everything that the Bible talks about here. And when we think about it from the context of Acts chapter 2, and it talks about how they believed they were together, they had all things in common, they sold possessions, they parted them to all men as every man had need. What they're saying, we see the need, we see the concern. And again, I don't want to flatten this into just emotional well-being. This was physical, practical things and say, hey, I can do something about this. I can meet this need. It's not just a matter of saying, good luck with everything. It's a matter of saying, what can I do to help this? And we ought to be sensitive to the needs of people in our church especially. I'm not trying to eliminate generosity to the world. I'm not trying to eliminate just being good to people in general, but there's a special level of concern that we ought to have for the people that we go to church with, the people that we're covenanted, that we are in a relationship with from a church perspective, right? These things ought to matter to us. It ought to touch our souls. It ought to concern us when we hear that something happened to somebody in the church and it really not affect us very much. Because what we're saying is, we are, like on paper, I'm a community, but whatever happens to them doesn't affect me, right? It's not that big of a deal to me. And it's something that I can work on. I think it's something that we can work on here. We need to be bearing each other's burdens. Galatians says that. Go to Galatians. You're in 1 Corinthians. I'd invite you to go over and look at that verse with me. Galatians chapter 6:2. It says, bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. The context is talking about forgiving and people being overtaken in a fault, and just really, but this idea of burden is just the weight that people are bearing. And as fellow believers, this ought to when we know that people are carrying weights, whether it's in this specific context, the context of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, the context of Acts chapter 2, when there's a burden that's going on in the church, our desire ought to be, look at what it says at the end of verse 2, and so fulfill the law of Christ. It's almost, it's interesting. It's interesting how he says, bear ye one another's burdens. We can accept that at face value. We can take it. And he just like tacks on at the end of it, and so fulfill the law of Christ. And I'm like, that's a pretty weighty statement that he's adding to what he's telling us here. This is important for us. And as Christians, as people that are going to church together, we have an example here in Acts chapter 2 where people were looking at need. They were looking at burden. And this was a unique situation. There had been people that came in from all over the Roman Empire. The church had I think it's in verse number 41, 3,000 people were saved. I mean, consider from our own perspective, I mean, we're double the size of even the first church that when they had 11 people. I mean, imagine if 3,000 people got saved this week and they were from all out of town. You better be selling your property, right? I realize you understand what I'm saying, but what it is, it's seeing what's going on. And I don't think that this is I don't believe it to be. I don't believe the Bible teaches it that this is a pattern that we all live communally. That's not what's going on here. What it's saying is that there was need that was observed and that was met, and the Bible bears down on that time and time again. Look at 1 John chapter 3. This is a verse that speaks to the way that we interact with one another and really puts the finest of points on it. 1 John chapter 3. As we see their sacrifice, considering what their sacrifice was, says, but whoso hath of this world's good, and seeth his brother have need, and setteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? Look at the term, the phraseology, the words that's being used here. Let me, I read the verse, and I mention this often, and I look up more words than I even give y'all most of the time just for my own clarity, but like I don't read through this verse and be like, I don't know what's talking about here, right? Like it is very clear. It's plain English. It's simple English. It's short, punchy statements. And I understand who has this world, but whoso has this world's good. Listen, this is not a complicated thing. We are all, God takes good care of us. Man, aren't you thankful of how great God takes care of us? And seeth his brother have need. Do you see needs? I've never seen a brother have need. What are we looking for? I don't see anything when my eyes are closed either. Right? When I go to sleep at night, I don't see nothing until I get up the next morning. Black. So I think we have to be careful about this saying, well, I don't see any need. Are you looking for need? Are you aware of need? It's not a matter of prying into people's lives. So you got any needs this week that I can? It's not a matter of that. It's just a matter of being aware and being involved enough. It's like, I don't ever know what's going on in anybody's life. Shame on you. Shame on me. Listen, we don't all need to be all up in everybody's each other's Kool-Aid too much, but what I'm saying is there's no excuse to say, I don't know what's going on in anybody's life. I don't know. And, say, listen, we ought to all be close enough to say, hey, what's 3 things you're praying for Sister Oneida for? What's some things that you're praying for Sister Teresa or Brother Jacob or Sister Sarah? Like, what are some things that we're praying? Like, well, I don't really know. We're so disconnected, you can't think of 2 or 3. Not just God bless them, keep them safe, love them like I love them, help me to treat them good. Like, I'm talking about specific things. Where's the need that we see in our life? It says, seeth his brother's need, setteth up his bowels of compassion from him. The way that he describes this, I think, is worthy of note. It says, and setteth up his bowels of compassion. You know what? When you shut something up, what is it before you shut it? Huh? Open, right? Yeah, it's not a trick question, right? Open. So it's almost like, this is the way I'm phrasing it. Let me give you an illustration. In control systems, I'm going to be very careful because there's definitely someone who knows what way we're that. There's at least two types of valves. You have normally open and normally closed, right? Is that right so far? And so a normally open valve, its resting state with no power applied is the valve is open. You apply power to it to close it, right? A normally closed valve, its resting state is closed. You apply power to open it. And you can talk to Brother Jeremy about why you would use any one at any given time. So when it says, and setteth up his bowels of compassion, what I see is this should be normally open, right? Because I'm having to do something to close it. So listen, if you're having to put forth the power, put forth the effort to close the bowels of compassion, that, let's put it very simple, shame on you and shame on me. Because it's almost like it's expected that the natural state is the bowels of compassion are open, right? When I get saved, it just ought to come open, right? I'm not holding things tight. I don't, say, well, God this and God doesn't supply me with that. Listen, everything that you own, you ought to say, this is God. How do you want me to use this? How do you want me to do this? And it says, don't shut your bowels of compassion. They ought to be open normally. It says, how dwelleth the love of God in him? It's a rhetorical question. What he's intimating, what he's arguing is the love of God does not dwell in him. Because if the love of God dwelt in him, his bowels of compassion would be open. So we do see their concern. You have to apply power to such your compassion. Because when you're saved, your natural resting state should be open. It just ain't right. It's just not right. Let's go back to Acts chapter 2 as we think about this. I want to stay a slightly closer to the text from a textual point of view here. It says, and they that believed and all that believed were together. So they were close enough. They were close enough to where you could share actual parts of your life. And by I mean actual parts of your life, it says, and had all things in common. Listen, it's hard to do that if you're all spread out and never spending time together and never interacting with each other, right? This is more difficult to do. So there's a place where the concern could be exercised because they were close enough to do it. Now, I'm not arguing that we should all live together and just all pool our money. That's not the point. The point is, how do we treat what God has given us when there are people in our church around us with actual needs? This ought to make a difference. This ought to make a difference to us. It says, so we see the surrendered goods, right? It says, and they sold their possessions and goods. So I looked up, well, what's the difference between possessions and goods? And it's really probably about as close as those two words sound, to be perfectly honest, right? There's some people would argue that possessions are more of real estate, essentially, and goods are, just the stuff that your shelves and cabinets and drawers are full of, right? It's like, does everybody not have like some sort of junk drawer, right? You open it up and be like, that's my goods right there, right? It's just stuff, right? And we all have this stuff and these type of things. It says, and they were selling them. It doesn't say they were told to sell them, right? In fact, you go over it's in Acts chapter 5. It's kind of I say a negative example. It's a interesting example, to say the least, of where it talks about Ananias and Sapphira. It doesn't say the church said, you have to come sell your property. They lied to God about what they were doing, but nobody made them do it. That wasn't the problem. And so they were selling it. And it's not because they were told to. It's not because they had to. It's because they wanted to. It's because they saw a need and says, I have disposable goods and possessions that I don't need. You have any goods and possessions you don't need? I was even thinking about it. I'm not a big fan of church. That's an understatement. I'll put it like that. I'm not a big fan of church-sponsored like garage sales and bake sales and stuff like that, right? And by not a big fan of it, probably over mine and Dad's dead body would we ever do that, right? But you realize you can have a church garage sale, right? Now, I don't know that I would put Faith Baptist Church on any advertisement. That's probably not right. But you know what? You can sell anything you want and give the money to the church. Sell anything you want and give it to somebody in the church. Say, so-and-so's having a hard time. Do I have a couple of $100 worth of stuff I could sell, not even miss it, and help somebody out? Probably all of us do. I tell you what, if you don't think you do, let me come look, right? And if I think you don't, let you come. Like, my guess is we could all just kind of like swap houses and find stuff and it's one of those things like, stuff could probably be taken out of your house and you wouldn't even know it was gone, right? It's like, I was talking, me and Heather were talking about something. She's like, well, I'm just going to throw it away and they'll never even notice it's missing. Now they're going to go home and say, what did she throw away, right? And you know what? We probably all have like that. You know what? You could probably go through my garage, not too much, but and get rid of stuff and do stuff. And I don't keep a very organized garage, so that's probably part of it. But I wouldn't hard know this. I've been in some of y'all's houses. Most of us probably have closets full of stuff, literally just stuff. Hey, and I don't have no problem with your stuff, right? Nope, your stuff, you like your stuff. But what I'm saying is, I don't have the wherewithal to help anybody. No, that's because you're keeping your stuff. You're keeping your possession. It didn't say that they took money. Let's get real for a second. It didn't say they took money out of their bank account. They looked around their house. They looked at their possessions, right? Seems like a lot more people own land back then than they do today. But even if you just take out the land aspect of it, right? I'm not asking nobody to sell their house, right? I don't think any of us have land to speak of. But I'm just talking about stuff that we own. Say, hey, you know what? None of this actually, I like the way it looks. What is that? Maria Kono brings joy to my life, or whatever the case may be. I don't have any problem with that if it brings you joy. But what I'm saying is, don't say you can't help people when you have stuff sitting around all over. So they sold their possessions and good and parted them to all men, as every man had need. It doesn't really give a lot of details on how this process worked. It doesn't say that, it doesn't say the church was collecting it and, taking a list and everybody come get on a list and apply for it. It doesn't say any of that. I don't know whether or not that's happened. What I think what's happened is people saw someone had need. They availed themselves of stuff that they had. They liquidated it and they just took care of the need that they saw. Listen, everything doesn't have to be a church function, right? If you see a need, what can you do to help it? They surrendered the goods. Acts 4, you're close to it if you just want to turn over there and look at the way it says it there. Acts chapter 4, verse 35. Acts 4:35 says, neither was there any among them that lacked, for as many as were possessors of lands or houses sold them, and brought the prices of things that were sold and laid them down at the apostles' feet, and distribution was made unto every man according as he had need. There seems to be a little bit more organization here. I don't know that you can necessarily imply that back, but whatever the case is, the reality here is that people were surrendering things of their own volition. Listen, we're not, I said I'd come to your house and tell you what to get rid of. I wouldn't do that if you asked me to, right? That's not the point of what I'm trying to make here. But what I'm saying is this, like, are you telling me for real you can't go through your own house and do it? Listen, you say, well, it sounds like you're trying to get me to sell stuff to give to other people in the church. Well, I'm just telling you, I'm just trying to interpret these verses for us, right? Like, if that's what you're coming away with, I can't help that, right? Well, all I'm saying is we need to be aware of need. It's very easy to say, oh, that's not a real need, that's not a real need, and nobody has a real need but me, and I'm going to keep everything that I own. It's very easy to get very cynical and very basically kind of stingy and selfish with everything that we have, and we ought to be holding everything with an open hand. Say, well, this is important to me. Your church family ought to be important to you. This is sentimental to me. I'm not asking you to get rid of your grandma's trinkets, but we all got stuff that ain't grandma's trinkets too that probably don't make that much of a difference to us. They retained. Really, this is you say, well, nobody here is living on the street and destitute and not eating, right? I mean, if that's the case, you need to tell somebody, right? Like, I mean, if y'all are going home and living under a bridge, please tell somebody, and we'll do. I mean, I don't know. I just can't imagine any of that happening. But that's not where we're at right now. But what I'm saying is, whatever we own in our hands, whatever we own, we have to retain possession without being ruled by them. What he's saying here is hold what you have with an open hand, recognizing God's ownership. And really, it's making everything in your life available for spiritual purposes. There's nothing in my life that's off limits. My money's not off limits. My possessions aren't off limits. My life's not off limits. My sacrifices are not. Nothing is off limits for God. They were doing it themselves. Acts 5:4, I'm not going to read this verse. It's kind of in the narrative with Ananias and Sapphira, but it's basically, I'm just arguing that this was voluntary, saying that nobody made you do this, right? This is voluntary on their behalf. If you're back in Acts chapter 2, it talks about sold their possessions, a good part of them to all men, as every man had need. Let me give you, I won't look at another verse. We're about to need to move to our second and third point very quickly. Really what it comes down to, and this is our takeaway, right? Listen, God has been good to all of us, right? I'm aware of that. I don't think there's anybody here, at least to my knowledge, that's just, on the verge of living in their car and not eating tonight, right? I mean, I don't think that's the concern. So what is my takeaway here, right? What can I apply to this? It's really this: recognize needs in the life of fellow believers. Be sensitive to what people have going on. And if you can take care of something, take care of it. Just take care of it. Just do what you can. We'll look at one. Let's see here. Yeah, we'll look at one more verse. Here, in this specific point. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. It's a good chapter on giving. I'm not going to dig into the entire thing. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse number 3, for to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power they were willing of themselves, praying us with much entreaty that we would receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. And this they did, not as we hoped, but first gave their own selves to the Lord and unto us by the will of God. So there's a few things in this verses that speak to the point that I just made. Number one, it is not just always what can I do, right? Because it talks about for to their power I bear record, and beyond their power, right? So sometimes it's like, God, what do you want to do through me here, right? Because a lot of times God's saying, I can do more with what you have than you can do with what you have. But are you willing to? The feeding of the 5,000 is a good example. You say, I've just got the 5 loaves and 2 fishes. What can God possibly do with that? Well, give it to him and see. And so it's not a matter of I don't have the power to do anything. God's saying sometimes it has to be beyond your power. Say, I can't help. I can't do this. I can't do that. And we spend more time making excuses for what we can't do than saying, God, what can you do with the little bit that I have? The Bible is too replete with examples of what God can do with a little bit for you to look at anything in your life and say, this is not big enough for God to do anything. So that's number one. I bear record, yea, and beyond their power. It says they were willing of themselves. The question is not, are you going to go home tonight and have a garage sale this Saturday and sell what you have and give it to somebody that you think has a need? You're going to give it to the church. Listen, we're trying to raise money to maybe build a fellowship hall and do some electrical work at the church. You have a garage sale and give a couple of $100s to that. Whatever. I'm just saying that, what are you willing to do? Is there any aspect you're like, well, I'm willing to do anything but what needs to be done? Man, Man, it's been, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 years ago. I was trying to get up with somebody, not a member of the church or anything like that. So just somebody in the community. I was asked to go talk to him, and I told him, I was texting him, and I said, hey, kind of give him my availability. I'm basically available any night but Wednesday. I get home at whatever time it was at that point, 4:35. Get home at 4:35. I'm available all day Saturday. Sunday's not a great day, but I have a couple hours in the afternoon. And they said, I'm available any day before 4:30. I'm like, okay, yeah. Like, seriously, and I'm available all day on Sunday. It's like everything that I said I wasn't, that's their only availability. So it's like, I don't think you're very interested in getting together. And what I'm saying here is, are you willing to do anything? It's like God says, God, I'll do anything. Tell me when and where. And say, well, I need this, I need that. Well, other than that. And I don't really want to do that. I don't want to sacrifice that. I don't want to give that. The Bible says they were willing of themselves. Are you even willing to do this? Are you even willing to sacrifice? It says, praying us with much entreaty that we would receive the gifts. Listen, say, well, I tried to help and they didn't want me to help. Try harder. It says here that they prayed with much entreaty that we would receive the gift. Why would you have to pray somebody with much entreaty that they would receive the gift if they were reticent to take it? Unless they were reticent to take it. Let me make sure I get that right? It feels like praying us, much entreaty that we would receive. Basically, don't be too humble to take something from somebody, too proud to take something from somebody either. It says, we receive the gift, take upon us the fellowship of the ministry of the saints. And this they did, verse 5, not as we had hoped, but first gave their own selves to the Lord and unto us by the will of God. Listen, that's really the crux of what I'm talking about. Have you even given yourself to the Lord, right? Because if you'll do that, the rest of this stuff is so easy. Any reticence you feel, any difficult, any resistance, any pushback that you feel against anything I've said today, we're not given to the Lord like we ought to. It's not, I'm not even sitting here saying, well, you're not committed to the church like you ought to be. You're not concerned about the brethren like you ought to be. You haven't given yourself to the Lord like you should. Because when you do that, all of this other stuff truly, really does kind of take care of itself. Let's move to, let's see. Yeah, personal sacrifice, 1 2 Corinthians, we've kind of touched on that. So, let's go back to Acts, turn over to Acts chapter 2 with me. Just a few quick more thoughts. This will be quicker. I won't spend as much time on these last kind of 2 points as we did even on this first one. I knew this would be weighted heavily intentionally. But kind of to move into that last part, so I just want to ask before we move on, because I don't really feel like I talk about this kind of stuff hardly ever. How are your bowels of compassion, to couch it in KJV terms? We need to be giving people. We ought to want to be giving people. First, I think, and especially in the context of what we're talking about, to the household of faith, but in general is okay too. Do you see need? Do you care? I'm worried that, I assume all companies have it. I don't know that. I feel like every company I've ever worked for has. They have United Way campaigns every year, right? And they want you to donate to United Way. Whatever you do with that, that's between you and United Way or whatever. That's not my point. But sometimes, I have given to United Way before because it was easier than not giving, right? Like, you know what? How much if I write down $5, can we quit this conversation, right? Like, what's the least I could do to get out of the conversation? And I'm worried that we can carry that mentality into the Lord's things. Like, what's the least I can do to not feel bad about this anymore? I don't want to be, we have 99.9% participation rate this year. Thanks, Caleb, for making us not get 100%, right? Like, fine, where's the card? I'll fill it out right? And I'm concerned that it's from our spiritual life. It's like, what do I have to do to feel good about myself? It ought to be more than that. It's a heart of compassion. Do you have a heart of compassion for the brethren or not? And more than just saying you do. So, Acts chapter 2, look at the last few things with me. It says, and they continuing daily with one accord in the temple, and it references them breaking bread from house to house again. And let me give you 3 quick thoughts for their constancy. They continued consistently, right? It says they continuing daily. And I think that this is important when you consider the context of it with the day of Pentecost that had just happened, right? There was, can I use the term, there was somewhat of an emotional high, right? This was an exciting thing, 3,000 people had gotten saved, and it's very easy to get excited about something and not be very excited a week later, or even 2 weeks later, or 3 weeks later. It says, and they continuing daily. We need to have some constancy in our life. Listen, everything we've talked about today, we're on the downhill side of this, right? So just stay with me. Everything that we've talked about today, this is not something you can decide one time. I'm going to be committed to doctrine. I'm going to work harder on fellowship. I'm going to break bread with the brethren. I'm going to pray harder. I'm going to have more fear of God, and I'm going to look for opportunities to give. The end, right? This is most of this, if not all of it. This is a daily, a weekly, a monthly, right? However, whatever time frame you're thinking of here, that you have to say, hey, you know what? And you know what? Maybe I hope that on some level, all of us, I kind of hit fellowshipping and the way we interact with each other, and I hope nobody felt guilty at all, right? I doubt it, but I can hope, right? That's what. But you know what? Just because you didn't feel bad about it today and all of your connections are perfect, doesn't mean that's going to be true next month. It doesn't mean it'll be true by the time you get home tonight, right? There's still a little bit of church left, right? There's more than enough opportunity for one of us to not act. All I'm saying is these are not things that we can just decide once and be done with. There's constancy, there's consistency that we need. I like how 1 Corinthians 15 says, therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. That's really what it's about. It's not a matter of just, I'm trying really hard this week and then we mail it in for the next month or something. This is every day that we have to do. They continued unitedly. Philippians chapter 1, I'm not going to turn over there, but it talks about that he may hear of your affairs, standing fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. We ought to all want to say, we ought never want anybody to question if we're all in on what we're doing here. We don't ever want people, I'm not saying they should question, I'm just saying don't give them a reason and say, I don't know if so-and-so is committed like they ought to be. I don't know, really the question ought to be is not look around saying, do I think this person's committed? Do I think this person's all in? Say, am I all in? Am I committed like I ought to be? Am I sold out on what we are doing here? It's continuing unitedly, continuing gladly. Psalms 100 verse 2, serve the Lord with gladness, come before his presence with singing. I'm just happy. I want to be glad every time I show up here. So we do see their constancy continuing daily with one accord. And we also see their witness. It talks about breaking bread from house to house, did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart. And really verse 47, as we think about their witness, praising God, having favor with all the people, and the Lord added to the church daily such as should be saved. Now, I'm a level of inference here, but I'm saying that talks about with all the people and the Lord adding to the church. I think it's unlikely, maybe more than natural, but my guess is they were engaged in trying to have the Lord add to the church, right? This wasn't just something that was just happening. I realize there's a lot of miraculous things going on here, but I don't think everybody was just sitting around and not engaged. I don't read this passage and read lethargy and lack of commitment and lack of dedication. I read a lot of things. We've talked about a lot of things, but I don't see that. Matthew puts it like this. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. So their praise went upward, praising God. Their testimony went outward, having favor with all the people. And the growth came from the Lord. The Lord added to the church daily. As we're done, as we wrap up my mentoring and my conclusion, I really want to bring us back to this one question. Not so much are you good on the foundation of the community? We got doctrine down. Are you good on the what was the second point? The little phrase I had. Let me scroll back to it. Or are you good on the life of the community? It's really not a matter of do you got the practice of the community nailed down or the proof of the community. It's really not that. I'm just asking, are you contributing to the community? Right? Am I adding to the church that I'm a part of, or are we just simply consuming? It's probably a little easy for a church like ours, a church that loves the Word of God, loves right doctrine, loves theological precision, to become clinical and checking every orthodox box on paper, and we're just locked away from everything else that's going on in the church. Church is not just a place we come to check a box. It ought to be a community that we're invested in. Acts 2, I don't think, leaves us a place to hide. We don't want to just be right on paper and cold in practice. And it's not a matter of thinking what other people are. It's a matter of thinking, what am I here? I appreciate your attention.